Welcome to our channel where the extraordinary becomes the norm. Today, we delve into the realm of the unexplained with tales that will send shivers down your spine. From objects defying gravity to eerie presences felt in the dead of night, these stories of paranormal activities are not for the faint-hearted. Hit subscribe and join us on this chilling journey, and don't forget to share your own spooky experiences in the comments below. Now, let's turn down the lights and turn up the intrigue as we step into the world of the unknown. Are you ready to be haunted by these true ghost stories? Let's begin. Story 1. One time when I was home at night by myself, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked over, and the bottom of one half of my scarf that I had draped over the top of my bathroom door was suspended at a 20-degree angle, including the tassels in midair. At this opening in my apartment, including physical welts down my back, that I was terrified to be in it. I ended up getting dressed and going outside the building before I broke down crying and called my grandma to come pick me up. A different time, my friend and I were outside the building smoking when we heard what sounded like someone thrashing my apartment. I'm talking chairs being smashed into walls, shelves being tipped over. I was the only person living in the building at the time. We raced upstairs to catch whoever it was, but not a single thing was moved in my apartment, and all the other units were locked. I checked. I never saw a ghost, apparition, shadow, etc. When we first moved in, everyone hated coming into our building. They said it felt off. My ex and I never felt that way at first and thought everyone was exaggerating. By the time I moved, I wouldn't speak about ghosts or watch anything remotely paranormal in my apartment. Eventually, I watched the paranormal activities with a friend and cannot describe the chill I felt. Similar things were happening in my own home. Haven't experienced anything like it since I moved. Story 2. When I was in high school, my parents worked shift work at a hospital, and occasionally that would mean I'd be left at home alone at night with my dog. On this particular night, it was around 10 p.m. My dad had left for work in the afternoon, and my mom was getting ready to leave, so I was going to be alone for a few hours until he came home. My mom was getting ready to leave through the front door when she noticed there was a small pile of shirts on the floor near the stairs to the second floor. My dog likes to lie down on them. She said, "Make sure you put these in the laundry hamper," which was upstairs in their bedroom. I said sure, bent down to pick them up and threw them upstairs, and they landed in the upstairs hallway, so I could pick them up from there when I went upstairs. I turned around and my mom was saying bye to our dog and giving him a few back rubs before she left. I waved at my mom as she closed the door, then called my dog to come upstairs as I got ready for bed. We walked up the stairs together, and when I got to the top, I noticed that the laundry wasn't in the hallway. I checked my bedroom, which was right next to where I thought I had thrown them, and it wasn't there either. I walked down the rest of our upstairs hallway and into my parents' room, and there was the laundry sitting in the middle of their floor. With the layout of my parents' house, there's literally no way my throw could have landed as far and into their bedroom, perpendicular to the direction I threw it. And neither me or my dog had touched them after I threw them up. I got serious goosebumps when I saw that and then reached down to pick up the pile of clothes. When I picked it off the floor, I noticed that underneath the pile was a burn mark on the carpet, slightly larger than a quarter, as if something hot had settled there and made an indent. There was no smoke or smell, and looked like it had been there for a long time. I never saw that burn mark before, and I used to go in there every day to put my own clothes in the hamper. I quickly got ready for bed and tried to go to sleep and not think about what just happened. Still don't have any explanation for that, and I think about it every so often. Story 3. I went with my best friend during high school for summer vacation to his grandparents who live in the countryside in Japan. I stayed in his mom's old room, which has a small wall closet. Just above this closet was a smaller closet door, like 1.5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, just above it. Weird design, but their house is old. The first couple weeks, I was pretty jet-lagged and Japan is hot and humid, so I didn't really sleep at night. If my light was off at night, though, I always felt uneasy about that small closet space. Something about it just felt darker than the rest of the room. Toward the end of the second week, I started to adjust to the time difference. One morning, I woke up and that small door was open. It was unsettling, but I closed it and just thought maybe it wasn't closed all the way and came loose. A couple nights later, I woke up feeling uneasy. It was dark and I could kind of see, and I could see that small door was open. It was much darker than the rest of the room, like black, pitch dark. This was the first and only time I experienced paralysis. I was too scared to move, say, or do anything. I just felt this darkness coming from there. I don't remember sleeping that night, but I must have because I remember waking up the next morning. I told my friend about it, who said his mom told him about something like that, too. When we got back home, and I talked to his parents, his mom kinda joked with me, "So, I heard you met the ghost." Story 4. I work in a cemetery. One evening I stayed up late to do some catch-up work. I was taking pictures of some granite samples to have on my phone and had already locked up. I was alone. As I was holding my phone, I heard the doorway to the basement swing open, slam shut, and heard footsteps go down the stairs. I froze. I thought for sure someone had come in. I called out to see if it was someone for maintenance. No reply. I got scared because if it wasn't them, someone had broken in. I stayed still for a bit and listened, then called out again. Nothing. Finally, I got brave enough to look. No one there. I peeked down the basement, empty. All the doors were still locked. Story 5. I stayed in an Irish castle built in the 1600s. It was off-season, and I got it paid for by doing promotional stuff. Nobody else was staying there that night in the old part but me. I didn't confirm this until the next morning. Only one staff member was available in the other wing. All night, I kept hearing doors slam. I was super annoyed. I thought there was a drunk couple fighting. I loudly said, "I'm taking 2 Tylenol PM, so have at it." Before they knocked me out, it went silent. Next morning, I realized all the doors, my room, the fire doors, had that metal thing that doesn't allow them to slam, but closes slowly. Try as I might, I couldn't get any doors to slam in that area the next morning, trying my hardest. Before I left. ETA, not the only Irish and Scottish castle haunting I experienced. Story 6. My brother was on the phone once with his GF when she started saying that she could hear some old lady asking my brother for a glass of water. There was nobody around him, so he ignored it, but she kept on insisting. He hung up the phone and went to check on our grandma, who was in her bedroom, and found her dead. Fast forward a couple of years. Around 11 p.m., I was on the phone with a girl when I saw a guy on a bicycle go past. Phone was by the windowsill. Same spot as my brother. That's when I noticed she stopped talking and asked her if she was still there. She apologized as she thought I got into trouble. I said no and asked why she said that, and she replied that someone was telling me to stop talking on the phone, it's late. Go to bed. I was on my own. Everybody in the house was already asleep. I asked her if it was an old lady, and she said yes. Told her it's my grandma, and that the same thing happened to my brother. She started talking about ghosts and stuff, so I told her I'm hanging up and bolted into my room. Story 7. My dad was in hospital with a serious brain tumor, The hospital was about 40 miles from me, and he was in no shape to even keep awake. One night, I was chatting to a friend on MSN, them days, and he asked how my dad was. I turned to my left, and I saw him sat in his chair, just looking at me. I replied, "Think he's okay," sat in the room with me. To which my friend said, "Isn't he in hospital?" I looked again and nothing. I never mentioned it to anyone and told my friend I must have been seeing things. Dad survived and is still here today. Cut to about 21 years later, and I met up with my dad and just having a chat. He says, "Something been on my mind for years, son, and can't shake it off. When I was in hospital, I remember been at home sitting in my chair. You was on the computer and you looked at me. Then I woke up in hospital, but it felt too real to be a dream." That's when I told him my experience. Story 8. I was in art class when I was 15 and a random teacher's aide, lady in her 60s, unassuming Nana type, sat down next to me and said that she had a vision about my job as an adult. I was like, "Oh, am I a photographer?" She said no. I was fairly dismissive and skeptical because I was certain that's what I'd be doing, but I said, "Oh, yo, tell me what you saw." She then went on to describe my job. None of it made much sense at the time, and I could tell she didn't quite understand what she saw. She said she couldn't figure out where I was because the place had no windows and everything was a pastel green color. She said I was making something that looked like CD covers, but they weren't that. She went on to explain that I was working with a bunch of guys and some of them were helping or teaching me to do my job. But the thing that really stuck out was she just kept seeing me do this thing where I looked at whatever it was I was making and that I would change the angle of it. She mimicked what I was doing. Anyway, about 8 years later, I ended up doing exactly all the things she said I was doing. I was a wine label flexographic printer. It got to me so bad that my future was set in stone that I eventually quit my job to pursue a fine art photography career. That was a few years back now, and I'm about to have my second solo exhibition opening this weekend. What I still haven't figured out yet was, have I broken the timeline, or was I just meant to have had my future told and pursue a different career? It's all pretty out there, and I'm not too sure what to make of it cause I'm not the type of person to believe in that sort of stuff. But like it happened, so there are people that can see into the future, and they are 100% right. Story 9. My parents had flown to Houston when I was 11 years old to see a specialist for my dad's lymphoma. It had just returned from remission, but there was no reason to think he was in any imminent danger. I was riding my bike home the day they were to fly back and stopped my bike in this ditch we used to ride down/up on our way back. When I got to the top, I felt a wave of emotion come over me, and without even knowing what I was saying, I told my friend I was riding with that my dad had just died. My friend was like, "What?" I just knew. I rode the rest of the way home to find my grandparents, my dad's parents, bawling on our back porch. I stood there watching them in the doorway for a few minutes, unable to walk out to talk to them. He had died an hour before I got home from school. No phone calls to the school, nor did I interact with anyone that knew prior to riding in the ditch. I just knew when that wave came over me. Again, there was no reason to think he was even remotely close to passing. He had caught pneumonia while in Houston and died from that. Story 10. When I was 6, I slept on a bunk bed in a room alone. The bottom bunk was empty, meant for my younger brother, but he was too scared of sleeping in a bed alone. So I was alone in that room that night. I remember a chilling feeling that night, then it suddenly got really warm, probably because I was undergoing a night terror of some sort. Then I start breathing heavily and open my eyes and see the room is empty. My little night light in the corner of the room comforts me back to sleep. Except as I closed my eyes, I felt a heavy hand petting my shoulder. My eyes ripped open, and there was no one in the room. As soon as I lay back down, the petting continued, and I covered my head, just pretending to myself that it was my mom. It took me 12 years to stop sleeping with my head under the covers because of that memory. My mom, of course, knew a woman passed away in that apartment before we moved in, so she always believed it was that woman trying to comfort me. Story 11. My earliest odd experience from my childhood home, I must have been between 3 and 6, and my dad would often pet me to sleep. I remember the big warm hand on my upper back. So my memory is waking in the middle of the night being petted on my back. I'm sleeping on my tummy, and I slept with the light on then. It is nice and warm at first, but it's pressing a bit too hard, and I remember being sleepy and not wanting to get petted, so I try to shake it off. This causes the hand to intensely grapple and poke at my back really fast. I don't know why he would get so angry and sit up in my bed, and there's no one there. I get up and go to sleep between my parents. A lot of odd things happened in that house, both to my parents and my siblings. I later got my parents' bedroom, and they took down a wall and made a larger bedroom for them, which included my old room. I remember one night being home alone in my teens, and stuff kept happening around the house, so I couldn't sleep. So I got up in the middle of the darkness and screamed into that dark hole of their bedroom to cut the shit and let me sleep in peace, and in general leave me the fuck alone. This was around the time the happenings were at their highest, and that kind of settled it, and I felt at ease there from then on. Edit. As mentioned in here, brains and memories are fickle, especially brains of children and old memories. And I'm 42. We even alter memories each time we access them, so everything should be read with a grain of salt, if any at all. That's not what we're sharing today, though. This part of my memory as is, and no dish-a-bag is going to tell me it's not. Story 12. Late one weekend night, my parents were out at a party, so it was just my sister and I home. I heard my parents come home, so like a kid, I instantly shut off all my video games and pretended to be asleep. As a kid, I always went to bed with the little lamp on. I hopped in bed and pretended to be asleep when I heard someone enter my room and head for the light on my dresser. Their back was to me, and I saw they were reaching for my lamp to turn it off. Just as I had that thought, they turned around and looked directly at me and stared for what felt like forever. Brown dress, like Victorian era, and what looked like the face of an old woman. Where their eyes were, it was very dark and I couldn't make out any details. I saw them smile at me and then shut the light off before I fell asleep. The next morning at breakfast, my parents said they were surprised that I fell asleep with the light off since normally I left it on. I asked everybody in the house if they did it, and no luck. I have no idea how to explain it to this day. What's even more bizarre is that recently I found a picture of my great-grandmother, who died of old age some 40 years before I was born. She was wearing a dark Victorian-style dress in the image. Story 13. 2 days after my son was born, my husband's grandfather passed away. My son was a preemie and spent time in the NICU, so I didn't attend the funeral, but my husband did. Late in the evening, the night of the funeral, I was sitting in a chair next to my son's bassinet. The baby was sleeping and it was really quiet. A few nurses were around, but not close to me. I had this feeling that someone was standing right behind my chair. It wasn't a scary feeling, but when I turned around, no one was there. To be honest, it did make the hair on the back of my neck standing up, but it wasn't a scary feeling per Essie. After several seconds, the feeling disappeared. It was touch and go for a few weeks, but in that moment, I knew my son would be okay. My husband's grandfather was a kind and devoted man. I'd like to think he was checking on his new grandson. Story 14. A few months before I arrived in Japan to teach at a school, the third-year homeroom teacher tragically passed away in a drunk driving accident. Never having met him, I only recognized his face from the school group photo taken at the year's beginning. Fast forward to graduation day. Seated with the other teachers in the front of the auditorium, I noticed a lone figure standing in the back near the door. In our tiny town of 3,000, I knew practically everyone in attendance, except this man. He bore a striking resemblance to the deceased teacher, a resemblance I could only vaguely recall from the photo. Though a tad unsettled, I dismissed it as mere imagination and refocused on the ceremony. Later, during the post-graduation staff meeting, the principal made a surprising remark. "By the way, did anyone else see Mr. M standing in the back? So glad he could make it to see his students graduate." Story 15. The crisp night air seeped through the thin walls of my childhood bedroom on the ground floor. Our house, a new build nestled in a quiet suburban pocket, backed right onto a sizable, forested ravine. On 4 separate occasions, scattered over 5 years, a peculiar sight unfolded in the quiet of my room. A middle-aged man, clad in a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and a red hat, would pass through the doorway. A dog leash, limp and unattached, dangled from his hand. Each time, he'd pause for a beat at the same spot, his gaze scanning the room before continuing his trek towards the dense woods beyond our backyard. It was an unsettling image, considering the area had only recently been cleared for development. Before these houses stood, there was nothing but a sprawling forest. A chilling suspicion gnawed at me. Perhaps this man had lost a beloved canine companion in the depths of the ravine, forever searching for a friend lost to the wilderness. Story 16. My family and I used to stay in a very affordable beach cottage in the Outer Banks and sea for a few weeks each summer. It was a converted life-saving station with a lookout tower and everything. I was just a kid, 13 or 14 when we first started staying there. I used to walk around and talk to the local kids. They were shocked that I was staying there. I didn't believe them BC kids are going to be kids, and I figured they were just trying to scare me. I was wrong. The first few nights were quiet, but every night after that something would happen. My aunt claimed that her bed raised off the floor and shook violently, knocking her to the floor. She slept in the car for the remainder of our vacation. I'm a bratty kid and just figured she was drunk. I stayed upstairs in the room where they used to keep rescued and dying sailors. I woke up one morning to such loud banging in my room. I was terrified. Nobody was there. One of the beds had overturned while I was sleeping. The next night I woke up to more banging and loud laughter from the tower. I figured it was my sister on the phone, but nobody was there. As the days went on, I felt like somebody was watching me any time I showered or used the upstairs bathroom. The banging in the tower was nightly at this point, and I was absolutely terrified. One morning I had slept in, being a teenager at all, and woke up to my relatives trying to get into the house after a morning at the beach. Every single door in the entire house was dead, locked from the inside. Very odd. We spent a few more summers there, each time the same experience. Eventually, the house washed away during a hurricane, leaving only the tower behind on the beach. It's a shame, because I'd love to stay there as an adult and see. Story 17. One weekend, visiting my dad's house, a strange occurrence unfolded. He'd gone upstairs for a shave when a distinct sound reached him, footsteps in my stepsister's room. Initially, I dismissed it as him walking around, but upon getting up, I found him frozen at her closed door. He turned, whispering, "You hear that too, right?" I confirmed with a nod. Slowly, he creaked the door open. Inside, my stepsister lay fast asleep. The situation defied logic. There was no way she could have crossed the room, climbed into bed, and feigned sleep so convincingly in the mere seconds it took my dad to open the door. He proceeded to examine the room, checking the TV, a bulky 90s model that emitted heat when turned on, finding it cold and unlit. The radio, too, remained silent, dispelling any notion of a song's beat causing the sound. This wasn't an isolated incident. We continued to hear footsteps, often early mornings. Some were so heavy, they rattled the dining room ceiling fan directly below her room, even waking her on occasion. For me, a chilling sensation accompanied every shower I took at my dad's. It felt as though someone lurked behind the curtain. This persistent unease escalated into full-blown stress and paranoia. I reached a point where showering at the house, or even entering the upstairs bathroom, became unthinkable. Months passed with this growing fear, all the while I kept it bottled up inside. One day, my dad, seemingly sensing my distress, asked a question that sent shivers down my spine. "Do you ever feel like someone's in the shower with you when you're here?" Story 18. At my mom's old apartment, I used to have this feeling I was always being watched. Then I started to wake up at 3 a.m. consistently. One night when I had woken up, I heard someone call out my name. It was a woman's voice, but I didn't recognize it. She kept calling out my name and walking towards my bed, getting closer, but I didn't see anything. I freaked out, jumped off my bed, and ran into my brother's room. I hopped into bed with him and tried waking him up. The punk sleeps like the dead. He still sleeps like that. I heard her footsteps follow me to his doorway. After that, every time I woke. Up in the middle of the night, I just ran into his room and slept on the top bunk. We had bunk beds. My mother still doesn't believe that happened. Thankfully, we only lived there for a couple of months, then moved out. Story 19. A similar thing happened to me when I was a teenager. I began waking up every night around 3 a.m. feeling like something was about to hurt me. It was just this awful, knotted dread sitting in my stomach. My dog would often also wake up, hackles raised. There was a bathroom attached to my bedroom that I believe was the source of it. It had the worst energy. I always refused to use it. No matter how many times we changed the bulbs or tried to fix the wiring, the lights always flickered this ugly green color. The shower in it had a sliding door. Sometimes, when I would awaken at night, I would hear the door rattling in its frame, hard. The AC had not kicked on, and the fan was not on. It only ever happened around 3 a.m. I would lie awake, staring at the bathroom door, waiting for it to slide open. Fortunately for my sanity, it never did. The shower door rattled alone in the dark bathroom, slamming against the sides of its track, but the bathroom door itself stayed shut. I once had a friend sleep over, and he bolted awake around that same 3 a.m. time frame whilst I was fucking around on my computer. He turned to me and told me he had felt suddenly very afraid, and that he wasn't sure what had woken him up. I hadn't told him a thing about what I had been experiencing. Just before moving out, I went in to clean that bathroom to prepare for the sale of the house. I heard a slight hum, like a woman singing. Nobody else was home, and no radio or television was on. I stopped to listen, as it was very quiet and very brief, and heard it again directly in my left ear. Loud and clear. I bolted outside and did not come back in until everyone was home. My mother would not let me talk to her about it. She would very angrily shut me down whenever I tried to bring it up, loudly shushing me and saying she didn't want to hear it. I think she was afraid of something. My brothers later admitted they had tried to have a ghost hunt in what they felt to be my haunted bathroom while I was away at soccer practice one afternoon. Even they were wary of it. I'm still not sure if I was just crazy or not, as nothing outrageous ever happened. I just remember the constant fear. Story 20. Attended a school back in 2013 to 2014 that was so haunted I still don't believe it. Me and many other students, but also some of the teachers working there, saw things go flying in the air, heard footsteps, were sometimes touched by something we couldn't see, and had various new and expensive equipment. Myself, I had an iPhone 5 and a fully spec'd late 2012 iMac at the time, failed whenever the ghost entered the room we were in, and so on. The various tech problems all disappeared as soon as I left the school and took my stuff back home with me BTW. The iMac is still in use today by my uncle, and he experiences no issues with it to this date. So to my first serious experience at the school. One night I was alone with a girl at my student house. Everyone else was partying down at the school building, when suddenly we started hearing footsteps from the attic upstairs. It was a tiny room up there that was only big enough for storing some tour and hiking equipment, like a few backpacks and such. After maybe half a minute or so, the footsteps started coming down the stairs from the attic. At this point, me and my friend went dead silent, and we were both just staring towards the door that went to the attic. The footsteps came all the way down and went into the living room where we were sitting. At this point, the sound of the footsteps switched from sounding like someone walking around in big boots into what to me sounded more like someone coming wet and barefoot out of the shower/tub. When the sound got to the middle of the room, which was right in front of where me and this girl were sitting, it stopped, and for a few brief moments, there was nothing but dead silence. The girl and I just looked at each other for like 5 to 10 seconds before my eyes caught something going on behind the girl's back. We were sitting on a couch together, and behind her were these huge windows that went from the floor and all the way up to the ceiling. They had some seriously huge blinds as well, and so I watched this pretty heavy lead thing that certain industrial blinds have be lifted all the way up from the floor to just above the middle of the window. There it kept floating in the air for about 5 seconds before it was punched into the window with such force that I'm sure the window would have broken if it hadn't been for those thick blinds protecting it. The girl didn't see this as it happened behind her back, but you can be sure that she heard the noise. In fact, she got so scared that she literally jumped into my lap screaming. That's the moment when I stopped trying to give possible, natural explanations to everything paranormal. Story 21. I was living in an apartment with 3 roommates at the time. I was 19 and working all sorts of weird hours. As usual, I would stay up late most nights. Our apartment had 2 hallways that formed a capital L. My room was at the top of the L. The bathroom was in the corner of where the lines meet, with the door being in the inside middle of the small section. In the outside corner was the living room. My roommate had his bedroom at the end of the little part of the L. I walked out of my room to go to the bathroom. No need to turn the light on, as this was a trek I had made hundreds of times before. As I left the bathroom, I turned to go back to my room. Just as I turned off the lights of the bathroom there, standing where the short hallway and the living room met, there was a teenage girl standing there, wearing a white flowery dress, just smiling. She didn't look evil, just a normal person standing there smiling at me. I freaked the fuck out and went running for my room. About 20 minutes later, I finally came out of my room, turning all the lights on as I went through the apartment. She was nowhere to be seen. However, where I saw her standing was noticeably colder than the rest of the apartment should have been for an August evening. Creepy, but not the worst part. I lived there for about another year, and I never saw her again. After I had moved out, I was hanging out with my one roommate who had the bedroom at the end of the small hallway, right next to the bathroom. We were talking and I told him that I never felt comfortable in the apartment after something happened. To which he responded, "Oh, you saw her too. I nearly drove off the road when I heard this." We then both described her, finishing off each other's sentences describing her. He had seen her twice. I was indifferent about ghosts before that. Now I believe in them. Or believe in something. It was very creepy, and every time I tell the story, the hairs stand up on my arms. Story 22. I was awoken one night to a loud crash in my bathroom. I went in and all of the things on my sink top were in the middle of the floor. I mean, about 3 feet away from the sink. Everything. Not just one thing fell over and knocked the other into the sink, but toothbrush, toothpaste, hair gel, face wash, hand soap, all on the floor in the middle of the bathroom. What was even worse is that, between waking up and going to check out the bathroom, as I crossed the landing back to my room, I noticed a light had come on downstairs. I went down and both the hall light and living room light were on, except none of the light switches were in the on position. I had to click the switch on off to make them switch off. I was living on my own at the time and it freaked me out a little bit, but I'm still in the same house and have had no other experiences. Story 23. I don't believe in paranormal activity, but my grandparents' house is considered by many to be extremely haunted. It's part of a tour of haunted houses in the LA area and, according to legend, was part of the inspiration for American Horror Story. There are tons of stories, but the one I experienced myself was when I was living there as a child. I was about 6 years old and my older sister was 12 and we shared a room. My mom had decorated our bedside table with an antique telephone that didn't work and was not plugged in. My sister and I were asleep and for some reason we both woke up at the same time and turned to face each other. I remember feeling an extreme feeling of dread. Then the phone rang in between us. We locked eyes and both hid under our blankets till it stopped ringing. We both thought it was a dream because we didn't say anything for years about it. Then one day she was talking about it and we realized we had had the exact same experience. There are so many more stories, but that's the only one I experienced directly. Story 24. When I saw this thread, I thought about my experience in Turkmenistan for work. I was in the capital of Ashgabat, waiting for my apartment lease to be approved by the local council, so I had to stay at their hotel. For context, Turkmenistan is also one of the toughest countries to get into, and this was post-pandemic, so even their biggest hotel that used to house dignitaries was also empty and dusty. I fell asleep after video calling my boyfriend. I was awoken with my duvet lifted from one edge, bringing half of it diagonally midair and almost wavy, all while hearing chants by a male voice in my left ear in a language I didn't understand. It was so fast and rough. I tried reciting all the prayers/Quranic verses I could. I was born Muslim, but I don't practice anymore, and it stopped for a short second, only to begin again with almost a mocking laughter in between the chants. At the same time, I could feel my left hand fingers being pulled repeatedly. It ended as the sun rose. I immediately called my friend, who was 3 hours ahead in time zone, to just debrief and process what the fuck just happened. Told this to some friends and local colleagues, and yes, they theorized some regional jinns. Of course, I checked the fuck out of there that morning and moved into a staff boarding house. Most terrifying experience of my life. Story 25. My dad would have laughed at you if you told him you saw a ghost, until he did. He used to work late hours as a mechanic in a building that used to be a machine shop in the 20s or 30s. It was 2+ stories high, and the owner had built an apartment into it and lived there. The apartment was built on top of the parts room and phone salesman's room. It was at one end of the shop. There were stairs leading up to the entrance to the apartment and a small bathroom right at the door at the entrance to the stairs. One night, Dad is working after midnight and he hears this loud banging. He looks up to the source of the noise and sees the door to the apartment is open, as is the door to the bathroom. He goes up and looks, and the toilet seat is raising itself up and then slamming down. Dad watches a while, then goes back to turning wrenches. The racket keeps up, so he just turns his radio up louder and ignores it. A week or so later, he's working after midnight again, and out of the corner of his eye notices some gray, human-sized, misty thing floating across the shop floor. He watches it, not looking directly at it, for a bit, and it stops at one of the vehicle lifts. It starts playing with the lift, making it go up and down. Dad, Teed, Yen looks directly at it, and it disappears. It showed up many more nights, mostly just wandering, occasionally playing with the lifts. Often when Dad left, he would leave a part out that he was going to work on. For instance, he had disassembled a water pump and was waiting for a rebuild kit to come in so he could repair it. But when he came back the following day, the part was put back together again. One time he left an alternator on his workbench, and when he came back the next day, it was neatly disassembled. After talking with his coworkers and the owner, he found out they all had similar experiences. Also, there was a dim, back warehouse in the place where the owner stored some old cars for parts. I started going back there one day just to explore and immediately had a cold, don't go in there feeling. I went and got the shop dog to join me, an incredibly smart German shepherd, and went back. The dog refused to go in. It whimpered a bit, it growled a bit, and it slunk away. I asked the owner about it. He just smiled and said, "Yeah, don't go back there." Story 26. When I was young, around 6-ish, and sleeping in my bedroom, I woke up extremely early like my brain was making a Metal Gear sound. In the center of my room was a man. He was blonde with messy hair, deep blue eyes, tannish, with sandals, torn denim shorts, and no shirt. Like a total suffer bro kind of look. He stood there looking to the left towards the closed windows, then at me, and he smiled softly. He slowly places his finger to his lips and shakes his head slowly, telling me to be quiet. I felt intense fear and closed my eyes tightly for a few seconds, and when I opened them, he was gone. Neither footsteps, creaking, or any window or my door were opened. He was there then, suddenly poof. Story 27. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were using a Ouija board and nothing was happening. We took a break, moved on to other things like telling dirty jokes and listening to music. An hour or so later, 3 of us are sitting in my friend's bedroom talking, and the board is still on the table in the middle of the room, when all of a sudden the planchette flies off the board and lands on the floor. Just like someone had quickly swatted at it with their hand. We didn't use it anymore that day. Story 28. Not me, but a security guard I employed when I ran a dispensary. She showed me the video. In fact, she sent it to me and I still have it on my phone. It's a camera mounted in her young daughter's room. She's playing on her bed, which suddenly slides away from the wall about a foot. The daughter then jumps off the bed and runs out of the room to tell her mom. Later, the daughter randomly got up, walked towards and out the front door while the mom was calling after her. Daughter snapped out of it once mom made physical contact. Daughter had no memory of how she got outside. So, the security guard calls a priest who literally goes by and tries to do an exorcism on the apartment or whatever. About a week later, an electrical outlet behind a couch that she never used caught fire and the whole apartment building burnt down. I'm usually a pretty big skeptic, but I don't know how to explain the video. Story 29. My fiancé at the time and I went to visit my dad. He had just bought a property built in the 1800s as a place to eventually modernize and sell. It was still in great shape, and he invited us to stay there for the weekend instead of bothering with a hotel. We arrived and, tired from our drive, pretty quickly found the master bed and bathroom to get ready for bed. While using the restroom, I noticed some cold drafts and heard some rhythmic pacing, like sounds coming from the wooden floors. I brushed the cold off without thought at the time and assumed my fiancé was just looking around the room, even though the walking sound was more like a boot than a foot with socks hitting the floor. At any rate, we both went to bed and fell asleep pretty quickly. At some point, my fiancé is nudging me in the side. Sweetheart, sweetheart. She is whispering but has an urgency in her voice. I opened my eyes and my heart and blood went cold for a second. There is a faint white figure standing there, just looking at us at the foot of the bed. We both saw it as clear as day. What was even more jarring is that same draftiness I felt before was back. The figure had a feminine essence and somehow an 1800s look. Fiancé and I held hands under the covers, just sort of both awkwardly caught off guard. The thing we both remember now, aside from being a bit petrified, is that what didn't sense any hostility or malice, just a good 10 minutes of holy crap. The figure stayed relatively still, just sort of shifting her head back and forth like you would while looking at an item at a sale or something interesting. Then, as suddenly as everything started, the figure just went away. The rest of the time there we noticed other odd sounds and slept downstairs in the living room, all lights on. My dad also had a Corvette stored in the carriage house, but my fiancé insisted there was bad energy, so we never went in and took it out for a spin. TLDR, stayed a weekend at a house built in the 1800s. Woke up to a feminine figure at the foot of my bed watching my fiancé, and I sleep. Story 30. From time to time throughout my life, I've been plagued by hallucinations due to sleep paralysis. They're eerily consistent. A colossal spider scaling the walls, a recurring nightmare. These episodes began in childhood, persisted through college, and even followed me into adulthood. The last one occurred just before the COVID outbreak. It was my default sleep paralysis companion, the only unwelcome guest I ever encountered. So, imagine my astonishment when I awoke to a man standing sentinel at the foot of my bed. Now, for the record, I live alone. My alarm blared insistently, and every door and window was firmly secured. Yet, with absolute certainty, a shadowy figure, a man with a discernible face, loomed at the foot of my bed. The truly jarring part? During my usual spider-infested sleep paralysis, I'm rendered immobile, a helpless spectator. All I can do is squeeze my eyes shut and wait for sleep to reclaim me. This time, however, the sight of this intruder sparked a primal reaction. I bolted upright, bellowing, "Get the hell out of here." Heck, I even launched a pillow at him. The events after that remain a blur. Did I drift back to sleep? Did the apparition simply vanish? One thing's certain, no one entered my home while I slumbered. My alarm boasts window and door sensors, and my security cameras captured nothing amiss. And oh, the pillow. It lay discarded on the far side of the room, exactly where I'd hurled it in blind panic. So, the question lingers. Did I dream up the man and, in a fit of sleep-fueled delusion, fling the pillow? Or did something truly inexplicable transpire in my bedroom, leaving me to confront an unseen entity and respond with a well-aimed projectile? Story 31. My older sister's old flat had a lot of weird issues. She had it exorcised twice. Turned out someone died in the house, as well as someone was murdered on the doorstep. Her BF would come in from work and would feel like someone punched him in the back of the head on more than one occasion. You'd hear him shout in pain as he came in the door. My then 18-month-old niece was lying next to my sister trying to have a nap, and my sister could hear her daughter giggling and saying, "Stop, I'm going to sleep now," and trying to play with an invisible figure. One night, I was staying over and had a terrible nightmare that a demon was trying to kill me, and I screamed at it to fuck off before fighting it off. The next morning, my sister comes into the living room really groggy and tells me she had a horrible nightmare around 1 a.m. about a demon trying to kill her. My nightmare was exactly the same time as hers. Story 32. Once upon a time when I was in my 20s, I was severely addicted to heroin. I was homeless, so a friend of my mom's let me crash in her empty unit in a building that once functioned as her apartment and hair salon. It was a storefront in a trendy downtown neighborhood in an old, yet updated building. The front of the building held the salon chairs in a row up front and a small bedroom with a bathroom in the back. I bought a mattress inside and got my blankets and headed down for rest in the back bedroom. I woke up around 4 a.m. to use the restroom and had the overwhelming sensation I wasn't alone. I can't explain it. It wasn't blurred by the drugs. I felt it in my spirit. I figured it was because I woke up in a new space and shrugged it off. I went back to the bed and adjusted my eyes to the darkness, and I started seeing shadows move on the ceiling. I kept rubbing my eyes and doubting myself. I figured I was just flipping out because I was sobered up now, scared and alone. This went on the next couple nights. Odd, creepy feelings in this place, especially being watched. Odd shadows on the ceiling, but I was able to get high, sleep, and not deal with most of it. I still felt uneasy though. But when you have a free place to lay your head, have heat, water, and do your drugs in peace, you place that ahead of everything else. One came back after dancing at a club to support my pitiful habit. I was exhausted, for the most part pretty sober, and ready to settle down. I showered, tucked into the bed, and was scrolling mindlessly when these weird slapping noises started in the salon room. Sounded like someone was slapping the hardwood flooring. It took every ounce of courage to peek around that corner out into the storefront of chairs. The noise stopped as soon as I got to the doorway. I walked into the salon chair area and noticed an old cable cord coming out of the floor. This was in the area the noise was coming from. I got a terrible gut feeling, and I knew damn well I couldn't handle it if this cable started moving in front of me. So I flew to the bed and jumped in. I was shaking to death. I contemplated running past that room to the back door and to my car. I knew I'd have to put on more layers, grab shoes since it was freezing but sounded too time-consuming. I thought of calling 911 and having them help me. I even had paraphernalia in there too. I didn't give a damn. I was willing to sleep in the winter cold in my vehicle with no gas in it. The slapping starts again, and then I realize it's definitely that damn cord. Had to be. The sounds made sense. It felt like it was antagonizing me. I sat there shivering on that stupid mattress listening, head under the blanket, trying to make sense of what was happening. Did someone break in? No. I just knew in my mind it was making its way in the back bedroom I was in. I feel like it felt me out a few days and was making its move. It was time. All of the sudden, I felt a heaviness in the space between myself and the wall, like someone leaning over me, looking. I knew it was threatening. My insides told me. My fight or flight is kicking in now. I shit you not. I heard, right in my face, a low growling. I have chills now. It was evil. I flew up screaming like a banshee fighting the air and ran out the back door to my car and cried my eyes out. I made a friend get my things with me. I can't explain how a presence feels, but your soul feels it. High or not. I never suffered hallucinations on opiates. Ever. This was something. I'm also happy to report I've been sober for 10 years now. I have 4 wonderful kids. I'm a wife, and I have become an addictions RN. Story 33. I'm skeptical of these things at the best of times, but once after a late shift at work, a popular science center in the UK that was built unknowingly on a mass grave, I was talking with a colleague and my manager. All the main lights were off aside from the cafe, where we were, so it was pretty dim. She casually brought up that she thought the building was haunted, so I thought I'd bite. She brought up the aforementioned mass grave, and as she did, the cafe light began to flicker ominously. We were stunned silent for a minute before she just said, "See you tomorrow?" And we all agreed and hurried out of there. Story 34. Pretty far down, so I doubt folks will see this, but here goes. My mom, for my entire life, said that when she died, she was going to haunt us. She was a strange cat, and she went through life believing she was a medium and could see ghosts. Growing up in that, you'd think I thought I had the coolest, kookiest mom ever, but she did it to the point it was embarrassing, and it turned my brother and I into huge skeptics. When our mom would say that when she crossed over, she'd send us a sign, we naturally said, "Yeah, okay. How will we know it's you then?" Her response was always, "You'll just know." Fast forward to 2015. My mom died on the anniversary of this huge house fire she was in as a teen. Growing up, she always talked about the fire, and clearly it left an impression on her. 24 hours after she dies, it's 1 a.m., and my spouse and I are asleep in our apartment. Suddenly we wake up to the sound of a smoke alarm. It's exactly as scary as it is in movies, let me tell you. We wake up and jump into the living room where the alarm is, and instead of being greeted by smoke and fire, it's cold, so cold. It's January in New England in a crappy old multi-family house, so of course it's cold. But there was one smoke detector just going off by itself. My spouse goes to press the button to stop it, but it doesn't. Again and again. Eventually, he takes out the batteries, and I swear to you, that alarm went off for another 3 to 5 seconds, which is an eternity for something with no battery, even if you count for residual discharge. It was the weirdest thing. A few months later, my brother and I are talking about mom and her ways, and I ask him if anything weird happened to him after mom died. And he said that the night after she died, his TV kept turning on and off by itself. To the point he'd go to bed, the TV would turn on, and he'd have to get up and shut it off a few times. Around the same time as my smoke alarm situation. It's so strange now, as a somewhat rehabbed skeptic. I just know that was my mom giving us the sign she always said she would. I still don't know if I really believe in ghosts, but I believe in whatever that was. Story 35. I live in the house my late brother used to own. We moved in after he had moved into his dad's house following his, my brother's dad's, passing. He was going to fix it up to sell, then move back to his old house, where my fiancé and I currently live. We were just going to rent it until we could close on a different house. It was a win for both my brother and I. About a year after we had moved in, and my brother moved out to his dad's house, my brother decided he had faced enough and decided on his own life at his dad's old house. My fiancé and I then purchased my brother's old house to keep it in the family. Over the next couple months following his passing, we noticed a few times things were strange, like a light would be on we were both certain was off when we left, or the office door would be slightly open when my fiancé and I rarely ever go in there. A few months passed with a couple of those strange happenings we passed off as we must have forgotten. Then one night I was finishing brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed in the bathroom, and my fiancé was already laying down in the bedroom. We were yelling jokes at each other from across the hall. My fiancé made a joke that reminded me of my brother, and I yelled, "You're lucky, brother's name isn't here. He'd get you for that one," and suddenly the bedroom light flicked on. My fiancé kinda nervously laughed and said, "Haha, real funny, where's the remote?" And I poked my head into the bedroom and pointed at the remote that was sitting across the room on my bedside table. My fiancé was really uncomfortable after that. I won't lie, I was too at the time, but the light has come on a few more times over the last few years. Maybe it's a bad wire or a bad ceiling fan, I don't know. I'm not a believer of the supernatural really, but I can't explain it. And if these things really are possible, then I'm just happy to know it means my brother is still around messing with me. Story 36. In my previous job, I supported an off-site team that was in a building that used to be the state's mental asylum. And I'm talking old school, like straps on some of the chairs. Some were still there, two, minus the straps, shackles in the basement, electroshock therapy, you name it. It was haunted. Rumor had it that the ghost was one of the nurses, Jenny, who died while working, not sure of the specifics of her death. I think she was knocked over by one of the patients and she hit her head and died. She was harmless, but loved to play pranks. Two things happened to me when I was alone. The break room was between the main office and the classroom. As I walked back and forth, a Ricky Martin, yes, the former Menudo singer, Livin' La Vida Loca, puzzle would randomly appear and disappear. Now, the office and classroom were close enough that it would be impossible for someone to go in there and place it, then remove it, especially how often it happened. Another time I went there, the elevator was broken, but no big deal. I had no equipment to bring in or out, just auditing inventory. It was oddly quiet, but as I was walking out, I thanked Jenny for being nice. I was a bit stressed that day. Of course, as I stepped out of the front door, I felt like I was pushed and slipped on ice in front of the door. I caught myself easily, so I wasn't hurt. Again, no one was in the building. Story 37. Well, I'd guess it wasn't paranormal, but if it was, its poltergeist level. When I was left home alone, I'd hear thumps, noises, and feel a horrible presence to a point I would cry and scream for my parents. I couldn't move off of the sofa and enjoy any time I had alone because it felt like I wasn't actually alone. I heard someone crawling on all fours, down the stairs, stomping near the pet cages, walking around our bedrooms. It was disgusting, and I'd still have to recover for about half an hour when my family got back each time. One time it turned my radio on and started playing a very specific song that I'd never heard before. I used to question it. Was it friendly? Was it a person? Or at least, shaped like one? Was it going to peek around the corner and stare at me? At one point, I even thought it was a man, a toddler or a mutated child my age that was using our house as a hiding spot. One evening, my nose just started frantically bleeding. Being the weird kid I was, I left a handprint on the wall from it, next to a cupboard I highly suspected the thing would use as a hiding spot. Decorative purposes? I honestly couldn't tell you. What I can say, though, is that I wasn't expecting another one to appear next to it a week or so later. It was also in blood, way smaller, but in blood. That's when I kinda thought there could actually be someone or something stalking me. I've always wondered if it's a specific spirit or curse, but no one prevails. Neither of the handprints were mentioned. I tried to show it to my sister, who was convinced she did it, but her hand was far too small. Whatever it was, I hope it's not watching me now.